Have you ever looked at a map of the US and thought, why does Michigan own this? This strip of land called the Upper Peninsula looks like it should belong to Wisconsin. In this video, we'll look at how some bad maps, a hot-headed teenager, and a war with Ohio resulted in Michigan staking its claim to this chunk of territory. In 1787, all of the land of modern Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, plus a bit of Minnesota, was organized in the Northwest Territory. This territory was sparsely settled, poorly explored, and even more poorly mapped. The Mitchell Map, published in 1755, was the dominant representation of the area, but it was riddled with inaccuracies. This caused problems when it came time for Congress to try to organize the region. Seeking to simplify and more easily administer the Northwest Territory, Congress proposed the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which would clearly define a Michigan territory. Congress followed the Mitchell Map and drew a line east from the bottom tip of Lake Michigan up to the shores of Lake Erie. The problem was that the Mitchell Map was wrong. The line from the tip of Lake Michigan actually passed under Lake Erie by several miles. At first, no one cared about the minor issue. That was until 1803, when Ohio applied for statehood, and this ordinance line became their proposed northern boundary. Ohio actually checked the line and noticed that it was short. Ever feel like your browser is slowing you down? Too many tabs, lost videos, constant switching? That can be frustrating. That's why Opera One R2 is the browser that works for you. With this browser, you are always in control. Play your favorite music from 7 different platforms without ever leaving your page. Personalize everything. Choose from stunning themes like Classic, Aurora, Midsummer, or create your own look with custom colors, sounds, and effects. Your browser should definitely feel like your own space. Do you need to multitask and optimize your workflow? Open 2 tabs side by side in split screen mode. Organize your tabs by context in tab islands, or use tab traces to easily find where you left off. And track your recently used tabs with a subtle visual trace, represented by a subtle underscore. And with Aria, Opera's integrated AI, you can get answers, generate images, and interact naturally, all without leaving your browser. Simply press Ctrl+// or Command+/ to access it instantly. Opera One R2 also comes with a built-in AI-powered image recognition, making it easier than ever to analyze and understand images right from your browser. This is more than a browser. It is a better way to browse. Opera One R2 is fast, intuitive, and built for you. Click on our link in the description and download Opera One R2 today. Ohio actually checked the line and noticed that it was short. It would actually cut them off from their port towns on Lake Erie. These were extremely valuable, especially since plans for canals to link the Great Lakes all the way to the sea were well underway. They petitioned Congress to properly survey the borderline and confirm their control of the land up to and including the Maumee River, including settlements that soon consolidated into the city of Toledo. Congress ultimately granted Ohio's claim to the land, although it was slow to send surveyors to confirm the situation. A similar issue played out in 1816, when Native Americans carved off a piece of the Michigan Territory's land to secure its access to the Great Lakes. In both cases, Michigan's territory status and low population meant it had no voice in Congress to dispute this. They essentially had to sit down and surrender their claims to the land. Soon, though, Michigan's population grew to make its own statehood application. The territory's secretary, John Mason, was expected to take the lead. As an ally of President Andrew Jackson, and with Michigan's population surpassing 80,000 by its own estimates, it should have been simple. However, Michigan had not forgotten the land they said was taken from them. Furthermore, in 1831, President Jackson decided that John Mason's talents were needed for work in Mexico. In his place, Jackson appointed Mason's son, Stevens T. Mason, as Secretary of the Michigan Territory. An intelligent and perceptive politician, it would have been a good choice, if not for the fact that Stevens Mason was barely 19 years old. The younger Mason now took the lead as Michigan made its application for statehood. As part of its application, it presented its own defined boundaries. Adhering strictly to the 1787 ordinance, it formally claimed the strip of land between 5 to 8 miles wide that Ohio had claimed years earlier. This land, known as the Toledo Strip, was now formally claimed by two separate states, and it was quickly apparent that neither would back down. When Ohio heard about Michigan's claim, they protested. They demanded that Congress and the President block Michigan's statehood application until they let it go. Mason and his fellow Michiganders refused to back down. They had some allies, too, such as former President John Quincy Adams, who spoke powerfully in favor of Michigan's claim, saying, "Never in the course of my life have I known a controversy of which all the right is so clearly on one side and all the power so overwhelmingly on the other." Ohio wasn't easily intimidated. Governor Robert Lucas declared the disputed territory Lucas County in his honor as a statement against Michigan. Mason responded in turn, passing a law declaring it illegal for Ohio citizens to conduct business in the disputed territory, and made them subject to fines or imprisonment if caught by Michigan authorities. From claims to threats, things were escalating quickly. Soon after, Ohio approved $300,000 to mobilize the militia. In a childish display of one-upmanship, Michigan approved $315,000 a few weeks later. In March of 1835, 1,000 members of the Michigan Territorial Militia marched into the Toledo Strip. There was no direct violence. Within days, 600 Ohio soldiers had arrived, entering a tense standoff across the Maumee River. With the real prospect of a regional civil war, Congress urged peace. They suggested allowing the Toledo Strip to be self-governing until they could negotiate a settlement, but both sides refused. On April 26th, a group of Ohio surveyors, guarded by a small number of troops, were attempting to judge the border boundaries to present to Congress when they were confronted by dozens of Michigander troops. Gunfire erupted. At this so-called Battle of Phillips Corners, both sides claimed the other shot first. The Ohioans scattered, but not before Michigan seized 9 of them as prisoners. The first gunshots of the Toledo War had been fired. But the worst violence was to come. On July 15th, a Michigan sheriff entered Toledo to arrest a man in violation of the law banning all Ohioans conducting business in the territory. A fight broke out, and the Ohio man stabbed the sheriff in the leg before fleeing. First blood had been drawn. Surely, full-scale war was here. Except it wasn't. As it turned out, mobilizing thousands of troops was expensive. Secretary Mason and the Michigan government couldn't afford to keep the confrontation going. President Jackson was also fed up with all the nonsense over a few miles of land. He had an election coming up and really didn't need the headache right now. So Jackson proposed a deal. Michigan would relinquish its claims to the Toledo Strip, but in exchange, Jackson would approve their statehood and grant them a huge chunk of the Upper Peninsula carved off from the newly formed Wisconsin Territory. Mason was hesitant to back down, but in the end, he accepted. Jackson signed the law in June 1836, and in January 1837, Michigan became the 26th state. Mason's performance in the whole affair was so impressive that he was elected as the state's first governor. Holding the office until 1840, he remains the youngest state governor in U.S. history. But if you're paying attention, you'll have noticed the problem. Congress had created this whole dispute by chopping off bits of territory to give to a new state without the territory's permission. And now it had done the exact same thing to try to solve it. The Wisconsin Territory was not pleased to have a bunch of their land carved off because of some other border dispute hundreds of miles away. It stung especially hard after the 1840s, when prospectors found valuable iron ore in the Upper Peninsula, causing the land's value to skyrocket. Congress had also repeated the mistake of badly setting boundaries. They declared the official boundary between Wisconsin and Michigan along the Montreal River. It's just that the Montreal River had several branches, and they forgot to specify which branch was the boundary. Wisconsin argued that the boundary should be drawn alongside the eastern branch. This was the branch that Congress's surveyor, Captain Thomas Cram, had sailed along, and he was named in Congress's legislation on the subject. This would also mean that Wisconsin kept almost 400 square miles of extra land. Predictably, Michigan said it was the western branch. Congress hadn't specifically said otherwise, and their surveyors argued that the western branch was Montreal's primary branch, and therefore didn't best fit the definition of the boundary line. Surely, the extra territory it gave them didn't hurt either. The territory remained in constant dispute after Wisconsin became a state in 1848. Both states commissioned multiple surveys to back up their claims, but neither could get the other to agree. Michigan rewrote its constitution to affirm its claims to the land in 1907. They also sent a diplomatic mission to Wisconsin to try to agree on a survey to settle the affair once and for all, but the state government wouldn't even give them an audience. Thankfully, the disputed land area was small and not especially valuable. No one was going to start killing each other over it, and it never caused serious problems between the two states. The issue went back and forth for another few years, until 1926, when it finally came before the Supreme Court, who sided with Wisconsin and declared the eastern branch as the legal border of the state. After 90 years of bickering and terrible cartography, and one of America's briefest and most pointless wars, Michigan's borders were finally decided. It may look strange, but after how much trouble it was to get their borders, no one is in a rush to try challenging them anytime soon.